So I guess to kick things off, we'll get to Tapulous in a bit.
Yeah.
Because it kind of makes sense sometimes to do things in a linear way, but before we get to what was undoubtedly the juggernaut that took over, dominated, defined the App Store, even before Apple did that with the iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
You were a kind of scruffy-haired kid doing law in Melbourne, and you were, sort of thinking you were on a certain track, and then things changed a bit. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. So, well, hi everyone. Great to see you guys. Thanks for coming out, especially thanks to the Italians. I love Italy.
Yeah.
Brief background, grew up in Melbourne, ended up going to Melbourne High, got some decent grades, and no one really ever had a career discussion with me about what on earth I should be doing. So, I looked at the grades I got and I thought, well, what can I do? I could do medicine or I could do law. So law sounded like a fun thing, and I didn't like blood, so I ended up going and joining the law school. And I pretty much hated sort of 5 years of that, but didn't really know what to do about it. And sort of it seemed inevitable that I would end up working at a law firm. And
didn't you intern at like a bunch of them? Like you had a chance to taste and hope that maybe you found a good one?
I interned at a bunch of them. I literally represented the tobacco lobby, gun lobby, a mining company that had poisoned a lot of villages in Indonesia.
A standard internship journey for law grad.
And, I sort of luckily, I guess in hindsight, I spent a year overseas doing an internship and followed that with another year of traveling around the world. So I took some time off before my last year of law school. And I came back pretty unrecognizable to the folks that I'd interned with.
Just describe how you looked. Because with your intern, you basically follow one of the two great Australian student paths, which one of them goes to London, works the walkabout, and pretends that they're enjoying life, but really it's a few quid an hour. And you did the ski journey, right?
I literally, to be honest, I just took whatever money I'd saved, and I figured out how can I make this last for 1 year. So it was a pretty frugal experience with a lot of hitchhiking and danger in hindsight, but for reasons which I don't understand, I survived it. But I came back, and in the very final moments of law school, there was a bunch of interviews to go and join these law firms. And me with my sort of long hair and sort of new hippie perspective on life, didn't do so well in those interviews. So what looked like a very certain path became a lot less certain. I opened my eyes up to other things. And I had worked for a couple of guys at a startup 6 months before the end of school. It's kind of called Free Online, which is way back in the day. It was literally a free ISP dial-up company. And I was running around universities trying to attract students. And I quite liked that in a way that I didn't like the law, so it was complete opposite. And the guys that were running it were ex-McKinsey guys. So they said, well, why don't you go and join McKinsey? So that's where I ended up. That's how I narrowly avoid being a law student or a law sort of professional.
And so your time at McKinsey, renowned for hiring smart people with a lot of hunger and just a general sense of get amongst it. You did a few interesting projects there that set you on a bit of a path, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, McKinsey's really funny. They're very behind the curve, I think, to be honest, when it comes to technology. But that didn't really matter because a lot of the clients also, which were big companies, were quite behind. So I helped a large bank there build kind of like a Mint-like product. They brought me in on day one and said, okay, you're going to be head of product for the next 90 days, and you have to hire someone that's going to be the new head of product. And I didn't know anything about digital or product, and it was my first project. But it was super fascinating just being thrown into the deep end. And after those 90 days, at McKinsey, because not that many people had done internet projects, it was back in 2000, I was more experienced having done one thing than most other people in the firm. So that ended up being what I spent a lot of my time on for the 5 years that I spent at McKinsey.
And so you found yourself in the early 2000s connected to sort of corporates and people with resources, but not necessarily, much of a clue, helping them to succeed with technology, and mobile was an interesting place to land.
Yeah, I was. I could not wait to leave McKinsey. They at the time they sponsored my MBA, and they obliged me to go back for a couple of years. And after those 2 years are up, literally 1 week later, I was on a plane here to Silicon Valley, and we had founded Tapulous probably 2 weeks after that.
Which is awesome. So fast forwarding to the start of Tapulous. The iPhone was released 10 years ago, a week or two back, like it's a recent anniversary. And pretty quickly a movement around apps, very underground, requiring jailbreaking and other things that would avoid your warranty on an expensive, highly demandable toy was taking off. Can you sort of talk through what you saw and the signals and some of the kind of craziness of that early time before there was an app store?
Yeah, to be fair, I was hanging out at a VC firm here for 1 week, and a friend of mine said there's this crazy Dutch guy or Belgian guy who's sort of getting excited about mobile. You should talk to him.
This is Brad who started Flock, right?
It's Bart.
Bart,
yeah.
Bart who started Flock, my bad.
And so we got together, and I started sort of learning more about what was going on in the iPhone world, and it was really quite shocking and sort of in a fascinating way. And about this time, there were about 4 million iPhones that had been sold, and something like 500,000 people had figured out how to hack the iPhone in order to put apps on it. And no one really knew about this. In fact, a lot of these people were in China because there was no app store. They didn't have access to an app store. But there were also a lot of indie developers that were trying to figure out what other stuff could a phone do other than make phone calls and perhaps browse the internet. And we started connecting with those guys.
So you and Bart look at this like interesting space, and it's burgeoning, and I think what was interesting to think back to and discover as we were talking was, it was well over 10% of the people who bought these devices worked out how to jailbreak them. And at the time, it wasn't that hard, was it? No,
you just had to go to a website or visit a website, and it would somehow exploit something in the phone that would enable you to hack it. You had to know about it. Now I guess they're doing it to break into your phone, but at the time you had to know about it to sort of to hack the phone. But people were learning, and it was growing.
And so there's this community of apps with interesting folks that are building them just for fun and for giggles and to prove they can.
Well, what was super interesting was Apple really wasn't cool back then. So there were basically two types of folks that knew anything about Apple devices. One were the people that were working at Apple, which were kind of hard to reach out to and didn't really care. I mean, Apple was starting to, on the back of the iPod, it was going quite well, so no one wanted to leave. And then there were these super weird sort of, I don't know, like Steve Wozniak sort of folks that have never had a job before, and they live at home with their parents and they're sort of hacking the iPhone. And you couldn't even find them by traditional means. You had to go onto IRC, and they all had strange handles, and some of these people were the people that were hacking the iPhone, and other people were the ones that were trying to figure out the tool chain to go build apps on the device.
Awesome. So there's this underground community, and I guess all of us are probably familiar with how important app stores and distribution, you get into the top of categories and all this stuff is now. Like, you'd give your right arm for a top 5 spot, or a chance of some good exposure. What was it like then? Because I think it was pretty primitive, wasn't it?
Yeah, so we started doing a couple of things. One was, there was no one else looking at this, literally no one. I think when we started the company, January 2008, we were the first iPhone-focused company that had been founded. And it was about 2 months before the App Store had even been announced. And so we started reaching out to these folks that had built apps, and we started buying them. And because they had no value, there was no way to make money from these things in this pre-jailbreak world, they were quite happy to part with them for a very small amount of money. So oftentimes we would talk to folks and say, we're building something, we don't know what it is, would you like to come work with us? And many times they'd be like, no, I like what I'm doing, or I've never had a job, I don't know what that means. And then we say, well, what about this app thing you did? What are you doing with that? They'll say, I have no idea, and we ended up buying it. So we bought something like 40 or 50 apps in this pre-jailbreak world. And when we started looking at the engagement of these apps, we just realized that it was crazy. Like, we had one app that was a wallpaper app to download backgrounds for your phone, because you couldn't do that in the early days. And it was doing, when we looked at the data usage and we talked to AT&T, it was doing something like 15% of all of the data traffic on AT&T were people downloading these wallpapers.
15% of all data
Yeah.
running through America's second largest mobile phone network. There's one app only available on jailbroken iPhones in a market where pretty much everyone else is rocking Blackberries and
well, it was kind of like Tinder for wallpapers, because you'd see a wallpaper and you'd flip it one way if you didn't like it, or you'd click on it if you wanted to download it.
That's amazing.
And so we did that, and then the other thing we did was there was only one place where you could find these apps, and it was something called installer.app, and it was like a community. It was kind of like an open source, weird community thing where the front page was literally a change log of what had changed in the app since you last booted it up. And I tracked...
And this is a change log in the installer.app.
Imagine if the front page of... Yeah, imagine if the front page of iTunes literally didn't have any apps on it, but just had some text about sort of what bugs had been fixed. So I tracked down this guy. It was, I don't remember him now, but it was somewhere in Canada. And I said, well, what are you doing this thing? Can I buy this front page from you? Can I pay you to put some apps on there? He's like, I don't know, it's a community thing, other people involved, I don't know, it's gonna work. So, well, okay, so we came up with a deal. We're like, what if you do like top 10 apps you need to download? And we have a deal where 3 of the top 5 have to be our apps, but you can do whatever the hell you want with any of the other ones.
Yeah.
And what if we pay you $1,000 a month for this? And the guy was super excited.
And so, a la distribution, you've gone around and approached a bunch of indie developers, and you know, neither of you or Bart were technical founders. None of you were sitting there hacking an Objective-C and just really wanting to like build from the zero. You guys are like, all right, there's a bunch of cool folks out there with cool things, and we'll put it together and see if that helps.
Yeah, and the super crazy thing is, before the App Store even launched, I think we had north of 10 million installs on the different apps that we had. Yeah.
Which is insane, because you have to jailbreak your phone to even get into this, and it was before, 4 million iPhones were sold. That's crazy.
But the hard thing was, when the App Store opened, all that didn't mean anything, because
back to the beginning.
Yeah, because that slate would be wiped clean. They were closing some of the exploits, and the attractiveness of the exploits went away because people were only jailbreaking the phones to put apps on it.
Yeah, right. So they wouldn't jailbreak it because they had an app store now, so they didn't need to jailbreak.
And then we learned that we had these 40 apps, but there was quite material differences between the code that would run those apps in the jailbreak world and the code that you needed to run them in the App Store world. So we had to spend time actually, if we wanted to use them, we had to spend time rewriting most of them.
So we'll get back to the adventure of rewriting and taking what you'd learned to then go on and dominate the App Store. But the decisions about what to do when you and your co-founder are raising some money and what strategy to follow, that struck me as interesting advice, and something we should probably all keep in the back of our mind when we get advice.
I'm trying to think which piece this was.
Anonymous VC, or anonymous advisor.
So we raised about $500,000, which was quite big back then, from some angels, pretty well-known ones. Of course, all of them were saying, it's great you've got this iPhone stuff, when are you going to do something for my BlackBerry or for my Nokia? And we said never. But they also were, our board was quite reasonably conservative board, mainly from B2B companies, and they're like, it's really important that you build a great team and find awesome engineers. And our problem was that the App Store was opening 2 months later, and there was no one that we could hire. No one wanted to work. No one from Apple wanted to work on this platform at the time. And all the other people that knew anything about it were all a bit crazy. So,
because Objective-C was basically, it was Apple or hackers that were more than a bit crazy. There was no other pipeline.
There was no one else. Yeah. So we hired, crazy is not the right word, but I would say,
it's pejorative,
I'd say there are a lot of folks that haven't had experience in professional organizations. And or hadn't really gone even through a proper software engineering degree. So, but we hired what we could, and we had to because we had sort of this basically a 60-day window to take what we thought were the best apps that we had built in the pre-jailbreak world and bring them across to the
It must
to the
have
real
been
world.
pretty crazy 60 days knowing that's how long you had to work with.
Yeah, we didn't really sleep much, to be honest. I mean, a lot of people slept at the office. It was rough, and in the end we only, like every week we started with 10 apps, and then the next week I don't think we can do that. We're going to do 8. The next week it would be 6, and then we actually ended up launching with 3 apps.
So the App Store goes live. You've assembled a merry band of team members and like operated under crazy deadlines and quite wisely ignored BlackBerry. What did you launch with? What was the kickoff?
So we thought we had quite a lot of arguments between the two of us about this. It's so hard to remember back 10 years ago, but no one was looking at the iPhone. So when we realized how big it was going to be, we looked at all the big categories and said, okay, we want to be the Twitter for mobile. We built something called Street Flow, which was like Yelp for mobile. Take pictures of your food and share it. We did something called Versus, which was kind of like a Tinder sort of thing. We did something called Collage, where you could share photos that would last on the other person's phone for like 20 seconds. That was Snapchat. We had like a address book-based social network called Friendbook, which was like WhatsApp. So, I mean, we looked at all these categories and we said, no one else is going after these. We're going to own this platform, which of course was totally stupid. 3 months later, when everyone else figured out that this was going to be a big deal, and we couldn't compete against any of these companies that would be building in any one of these verticals. But we ended up launching the Twitter one and the Friendbook, and then one which was our biggest game in the pre-iPhone world, which is called Tap Tap Revenge, which was a Guitar Hero sort of mobile game.
And that went crazy.
And then that one really took off. And it took off because on day one of the App Store, there were no free games. There was sort of Sonic the Hedgehog sort of thing that was $5, and that was basically it. So pretty much everyone that had an iPhone that was on the App Store downloaded that app. And it was the number one app for, over 3 years it was number one app about 6 times, but it was the number one app for like the first month. And then we understand that Apple changed the algorithm to focus more on velocity, and then it finally like fell out of number one.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I guess you'd already had distribution as being the only one in the village that they looked at velocity and everyone's already got your magic.
Well, there were people that were just coming to look for the apps that they were used to in the pre-jailbreak world, in the new world. Yeah.
That's amazing. So that was a pretty big roller coaster. I love the story of how you brought on board your director of engineering and the excitement of making that happen.
Well, we had like a big drama, and it was in TechCrunch, so you could read about it. But basically, the company just kind of fell apart for the most part, and
stress and tension will do that to an extent. It's like just where it's all happening.
Well, and also because, like, okay, I'm not suggesting that we were very experienced as entrepreneurs, but we saw like that there was no revenue coming in, like money was going out.
Yeah, there's no revenue.
And even though we were really popular, but a lot of the folks that were working on the team didn't have this, didn't understand this context, and so they just thought that we were the biggest thing on the platform.
Yeah.
And so about 3 months in, we were still kind of number 2 or 3 or something. Pretty much all of the engineers left. And so we had one of the most successful games on the App Store. We didn't have any engineers working on it, actually.
So there's this moment of panic as you sort of have to level set a crazily growing business. And
actually, I remember just the anecdote. I remember getting the train down from San Francisco to Palo Alto, and I had 2 engineers left. and we had to I had to tell the news that these other people had decided to leave. And I just remember this, for this entire 45-minute train ride, I didn't want to not speak because I didn't want to have any moment of silence where someone else could say something. And so I arrived at Palo Alto, but eventually I had to stop. I had nothing left to say. It was all, this is a good thing, we're going to do, somehow we're going to sort of rise from the ashes.
Wow.
And then I finally stopped, and one of the last 2 engineers yeah, I really want to tell you at the start of this call that I'm also leaving as well. So that the only guy I think we had left was a back-end engineer that actually didn't understand iPhone either.
And so you you land.
So we were.
Incredible hire.
Yeah. So we were.
Incredible hire. Has to drive across the country.
So we started. So we talked to. We found a really awesome VP of Eng who was at Apple, and she was great. But to her credit, we were also in a little bit in damage control. So we had all these people left, but we didn't really want anyone to know this, as you could imagine.
Yeah.
And that TechCrunch story happened literally the day that she was turning in her notice to Apple to come and join us. And to her credit, she still did, and she still joined us. But yeah, she drove across the country, and I kept following on Google Maps to make sure she was still like heading west.
So she joins the team. You're in a juggernaut that continues to go gangbusters, and then you get a knock on the door from Mickey Mouse's people.
Yeah, I mean, we still had a lot of. I mean, even before then, we had tons of ups and downs. So we lost the team. Then we almost ran out of money right when the financial crisis hit. We had to do another round that was on the same terms as the round we did before the App Store.
Yeah. And even before the sort of acquisition interest, you guys had to work out how to monetize a non-monetizable platform.
Yeah,
basically invented it all, right?
Yeah, so we were losing money. We in the middle of the financial crisis, we managed to raise $1 million. So that bought us, I don't know, not that much time, maybe 6 months. So what was really quite painful is all the other ambitions that we had to say no to, and we just focused in on this game because it was the only thing that was. I mean, the other products were doing well, but this is the one that had the most traction behind it. So we shut everything else down, and then we focused 100% of our effort on trying to figure out how to build that into a big business. And that took us to experiment with pretty much every single revenue stream that is now used on the App Store. So we were probably the first to do advertising, we were the first to do paid installs, first to do promoted apps, first to do like freemium apps, first to do in-app commerce. We basically tried everything. And so I think by the time we were acquired, we had 7 or 8 different revenue streams, and we knew exactly how sort of the ecosystem was working and evolving.
That's awesome. So out of the financial crisis challenges and needing to be able to make the revenue to see it to the next quarter, you guys actually proved out the ecosystem. And then of course, I mean, I read, it might not be accurate, but you guys are doing like $1 million a month back in 2000.
We were doing good money, yeah. Even more than that.
Yeah.
So that was cool, and we were meeting we had a lot of interesting music deals, so we were hanging out, we'd go down to LA and we'd sign deals with fancy people. And
Did you take an entourage?
It's so funny, you would think you would feel pretty cool about it, but we would often bring, we used to bring the guy. So Tap Revenge was one of the ones that I bought. So one of the apps that we bought. So we used to bring, and the engineer would continue to work with us. So we used to bring him along, and he was this weird inventor guy. He would often get delayed in the airport because he would have all this electronic wire going through his coats to shine lights out and things. And so we would take him to these meetings, and we were super cool, hanging out with Will.i.am. And as soon as we sat down and Will.i.am joined us, he'd be like, "Who's that guy?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm an inventor. I'm inventing, a sleep machine or something." He's like, "That's cool, And then we had this beautifully prepared meeting about sort of a strategic partnership, and all he wanted to do was talk to the more creative person in the room.
That's awesome. So that journey, I mean, how long was it from basically App Store launched, exit? It was 18 months or less, right? Or in that
2.5 years.
Oh, it was 2.5 years, off by one. Okay.
Yeah.
But 2.5 years of crazy.
Yeah. Definitely had lots of ups and downs. I feel you always think that your experience is the most extreme, but definitely, whenever I think I have a bad day now, or even a good day now, and I think, wow, there was a better one before or a much worse one before, it sort of is a nice leveler.
Have you got any, you've had a while to reflect on it now, and you're on to now your second startup after that experience. Are there any real key takeaways that if any of us find ourselves in a hyper-growth, crazy scenario, that are good things to keep in the back of our minds?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the biggest one I learned, so after we sold the company, it's hard not to have, like feel pretty good about it, feel good about sort of your contribution to the success. And so, I remember going into my second company, which was I met my wife, so I moved to Europe, and I thought I'd do some investing. I got bored with that, so then I decided to do a company, which is a travel company. Travel being something I'm really passionate about. And I remember thinking to myself, well, travel's a bad industry, and doing something in Paris is kind of not what you would choose to do, but I'm pretty awesome because I did this, made this great company before, so I'm going to overcome those odds and build a Silicon Valley style company in the middle of Paris. And probably that's theoretically possible, but I think I kind of learned that it's building a company, any sort of company, is hard work, and it's hard enough without sort of handicapping yourself on the one hand. And I also learned just like there's a lot of luck involved in being successful as well, and just being in the right place at the right time. Of course, you got to be smart and you have to like execute, but sort of they're sort of like probably like necessary but not sufficient conditions for success. And I think you forget that if you've had a success, you kind of like attribute most of it to yourself. Like, that's what the ego does.
And probably the reverse is true for folks who've had a crushing failure.
For sure.
Due to bad timing or bad luck.
For sure. It's funny actually. I have a lot of friends out of VCs, and I sold the second company as well, but like, their general opinion is they see lots of second-time founders, and they're much more. Some of them were quite smart. They said we're much more willing to invest in a second-time founder when the first one was a failure than when the first one was a success, because of this problem of the ego.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're in Paris. You've had a great exit, and you start working on a travel startup because you're passionate about it. And so the advice you got there was a bit different, wasn't it?
I didn't really ask that many people for advice, to be honest.
The experts were basically telling you that...
No, that was part of my problem, I guess.
Right.
I'm like, well, I don't even really care what the experts say.
Okay.
I can do this thing. But I also wanted to... I'd been working in digital product for some time, but I was not an engineer, and I felt like that was my big blind spot. So I wanted to be involved on the engineering side of things. So I worked with the engineering team, learned how to code, which I think makes me a much more capable person. But I couldn't. But then you kind of get into it. It's like there's fun, interesting engineering problems to solve here. Forget about whether it's a good business or not, or forget about what smarter people than me think about this space. Let's just go for it. So I should have listened to people. After 12 months in or 18 months in, I would talk to folks that were running big travel businesses and be like, what the hell are you doing? Please get out of it. You're wasting your life in this space. I'm like, wow, that could have been good advice 12 months earlier.
Yeah, now you're committed. But it was, a great opportunity to learn a bunch, and it still worked out to be successful. For anyone who's either here listening to this or watching the video later, any advice for budding travel entrepreneurs?
Don't do it. I'm a super buzzkill. If anyone is doing a travel business that wants to do one, please don't introduce or know someone who's doing one. Don't introduce me to them, because I really won't tell them what they want to hear.
Fair enough. And so you built that business out, and then you were, I'm trying to remember the details. You basically were, you kind of had enough, but managed to fortunately connect with the right people at the right time.
Yeah, so I managed to get the thing profitable. That was okay, but I couldn't figure out how to grow it. Because the acquisition cost was so high in the travel business, and what you make is not so great.
And the sense I got was an incredibly successful, well-run business doesn't necessarily act as a good fertile ground for the technology entrepreneurial execution, which is product vision, a lot of costs up front. You're in the red while you do your acquisition and dial in. It sort of felt like it was a little bit of a mismatch.
Yeah, I guess that was my experience was, so I had worked at McKinsey for large companies that were trying to do digital. And I never fully understood the difference between how a large company would do digital at the time and how a startup would. And then I went and did startups, and I started to see things from the perspective of being scrappy and launching and learning and focusing on building a great product and then figuring out how to scale it. Like, scale wasn't the hard part once you had something that really worked. And then I went back to sort of a large business again and tried to do the same thing. And personally, I found it quite frustrating because I'd seen how, like whereas in the past I didn't know this, but now I'd seen how it was the right way to do these things. And I saw that it sort of like was a mental block for the founders of this company as well, just because, it's natural. If you're a big business and if you've not really become a big business online, this way of creating companies and building value is totally different.
I think it's a really interesting lesson because a lot of us who are doing the startup thing don't necessarily think about how other folks, bigger folks, maybe more traditional folks, see the world. And if most successful startups have an acquisition-based exit, having a bit of a sense of that is really special.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's very difficult. That would be my takeaway. I don't know what I would do if I was to join tomorrow, I don't know, like American Express and try and build innovative businesses for them. I don't know what sort of, I know what not to do, but I would say I don't really know, I haven't figured out what the ingredients for success are.
Yeah, how to take that.
Yeah.
So you spent some time, helped to launch a few products, learned some lessons about how entrepreneurship works inside of big companies. These guys, for example, are huge with operations in dozens of countries, right? So that was the scale you were playing with. And then you found yourself with a little bit of time and you thought, you know what, I've done mobile, I've done mobile and travel. Now I really want to hack in a totally different space. And you sort of stumbled upon what you're doing now around the genome.
Yeah, well, I'd say about halfway through last year, I knew I wanted to do another company, and I thought I would do something in VR or AR. So I started going to some conferences, and people kept talking about the same applications, but not really showing them off. So I said, well, let's roll up the sleeves and do a few prototypes. So we built some things. We built kind of like a Google Hangout for VR, and built kind of, a lot of people said you could do commerce in VR. So I'm like, well, let's go we built like an art gallery where you could buy art in virtual reality, and the experience in both cases was really crap. But yet these were the things that people kept talking about at the conferences. So we worked on this for like 6 months, and then I decided not to do that. And about this time, I randomly read in a magazine about some Harvard study where they were trying to sequence the genome of babies that were born, sort of like in the first few days. And that got me interested in genomics. I've always been a bit interested in it, but I learned a lot more about it. I thought, why not build that business? Because that was just a study. And from there, sort of the idea evolved to where it is today.
And so, I don't know a lot about the space, but the one thing that I picked up was the orders of magnitude reduction in costs of sequencing a person's genome.
Maybe this is like a stupid analogy, but the way I think about it is, when we first got into mobile, there were about 4 million mobile devices and about 500,000 people had hacked into the phones. And now 10 years later, there's about 5 billion iPhone-like smartphones. So it's only 10 years that sort of transition has happened. And now there's about 4 million people that have done a genetic test, usually related to Ancestry or 23andMe. And there's about 200,000-300,000 of them that have downloaded that data and have uploaded it to a lot of different sites to see what else they can learn about themselves. Health-related, Ancestry-related, fun facts, and so on. And so my fundamental belief is it feels like the early days of mobile, and it's not hard to imagine, given how the prices are coming down, that in 10 years' time there'll be 5 billion genomes. And that's going to be a huge disruption. And there's going to be a lot of opportunities to create businesses in that space.
And so it's very early days and you're still discovering, but what are the kind of hypotheses that you're wanting to test? And
I should say one of the things that made me feel good about it is most people in the space don't like the idea, which kind of feels exactly like it felt, like mobile felt at the early.
They're not suggesting go for BlackBerry equivalent. Yeah.
You'd be like, in early days, like, what if you could put more apps on your phone? You'd ask a consumer, they'd be like, that sounds pretty good. And then you talk to someone in the industry, say, what about apps on phones? They'd be like, yeah, BlackBerry tried that 5 years ago, didn't really work, it's never going to happen. So, I think with genomics, feel the same way. It's like, well, what if you could do a $100 test and learn a whole bunch of stuff about just stuff you should look out for in terms of your health, or help you figure out what sports you can do better, or any number of things, and most people say that's cool. And when you talk to doctors, they're like, "Ooh, we don't want people to know that." Yeah.
Cool. So it's early days. What's the name of the startup? Have we got a sign up page we can go to?
It's called Basegenes. No, I got a domain, but no sign up page.
Probably soon.
Yeah.
That's exciting. Well, Andrew, it's been a pleasure. I'd love to open it up to some Q&A because there's been so much territory from the adventure. So yeah, if anyone's got questions, I'd love to hear them. Here we go, down the back.
Patrick.
What would you have done differently?
Patrick's question was, what would you have done differently?
I don't know. I mean, for sure, when I think about some of the apps that we started and then like dropped and then saw how big some of the folks that went into those categories became, geez, it would have been nice to go and build one of those things. But I don't know how we would have convinced anyone because it was just so early. And it was so hard even to get $1 million back in those days. So I don't know. I think we had good luck and we had bad luck. So I don't know that we kind of like just did what we had to do to survive at the time.
It almost is an interesting thought experiment to what would have been different if the financial crisis hit a couple of years later. Just because, the main inhibition for you guys as independent startups were just no one would give money to any or invest money in anyone because everyone was pulling back, and it just happened to be when the App Store opened up.
Yeah, and I would say like the other big decision that I keep asking myself, would I do it again, is the team, like the folks that waiting for the right people versus like hiring the people that you can hire. And I often feel like when you go to conferences or meetups, people always say team is so important. Like a bad hiring mistake is, it can be devastating, and all that is kind of true. But also, like getting to market late is also bad. So, we kind of lost. We had to do a reset, and that probably cost us a lot of time. But we still got there on day one of the App Store, which we wouldn't have done if we had made traditional hires. So I don't know what lesson to learn from that.
In your darkest time, what would be the one bit of advice looking back you'd give yourself?
So the question was, if, in the dark times, what's the advice you'd give yourself if you were back in a dark time?
It's funny, like I would say the one analogy that kind of worked for me at least was when I spent quite a bit of time backpacking around the world, and I spent quite a bit of time doing that solo. And I used to remember, like, you'd rock up in the hostel on like Friday night or Saturday night, and you'd be like, I don't know what I'm going to do. It's Saturday night. I need to do something, and you never quite knew whether that was going to be the best night or the worst night of your life. And oftentimes, usually it was one or the other. And so you kind of like, it taught me a bit of resilience. In that today could be a bad day, but tomorrow could be the best day. And I think that's given me a lot of personal resilience. And then when you've been in startups for so long, you see so many of these ups and downs that you know that these things are not going to last. But that was what I held on to, usually during those dark days. But for sure, it was stressful. Yeah.
Another question, sorry. When selling a company, did you panic through the process, or did you think that open book and transparency was the best way to sell? Or do you have two different strategies for both?
I don't think you ever are fully open when you sell a company. I mean, you're always, I think, when you're raising money, when you're talking to the press, when you're, have you ever read like a press release of a competitor and you feel really bad? You're like, wow, those guys are really nailing it and we suck.
Yeah.
Because you're comparing like the PR release with the reality that you see every day. And so I think when you're getting acquired or when you're raising money, you're always papering over to some extent like the warts. I think that's expected. So yeah, for sure. In fact, my co-founder, who is fantastic, I mean, a lot of our PR success was because he was great at generating buzz. But I often felt, and I was much better at sort of day-to-day execution at the time. And I was constantly stressed whenever he spoke to the press, because always it was sort of things, it was like 10, 20% more than what we actually were doing.
The skis, you're like,
So, you know, then I would spend the next day saying, oh God, how are we going to like live up to that one? But, you know, I think that's kind of what smart market, you know, you see some of these folks, the Elon Musk of the world, and, you know, and the hyperbole is pretty, it's sort of like, there's definitely a certain amount of spin.
Awesome. Steve, what'd you go for us?
Yeah. You had your first company where, like, you know, crazy growth and went on to be this big success, even though you had the ups and downs. And then you had the one you described as sort of got to the point of being a comfortable lifestyle business, but you knew it wasn't going to be the thing. Like, do you remember the point at each where you realized it was going to be one or the other? Like that, yeah, this is going to be a thing and this one isn't?
I would say I made both. The problem is I made both those decisions pretty. I weirdly will research a lot if I'm going to buy a car, but I don't seem to spend a lot of time thinking about these sorts of decisions, which is not a good thing. But you know, so I would say you kind of realize it, and there's not a lot. By the time you realize it, there's not a lot you can do about it. You know, you kind of either got money or ego or investors, and you sort of have to figure out how to like muddle it through. Part of the reason why I've taken 6 months or 3 or 4 months now working on this last one is I don't want to raise money until I'm 100% on board, because it creates a lot of, you know, then you're really all in, I guess. But I'd say like the biggest lesson I learned from those 2 experiences is another counterintuitive piece of advice, which is a lot of people say you should be doing a business in an area that you're passionate about. And I built one business in an area I knew nothing about that was like structurally disrupting, which was mobile. And then I went and built another business in an area that I was very passionate about, which was structurally horrible, which is travel. And for sure, of course, if you happen to be passionate about something that is structurally disrupting, then that's the best thing you should be doing. But the interesting question is like, what if you have to choose between both of those, like the other 2 options? And I would say like my experience is the market is way more important. And the sort of people that make good entrepreneurs, typically they're good kind of problem solvers. And I think, I mean, there's some lawyers in the room, like, you know, law is about solving problems. Consulting is about solving problems. Being an entrepreneur is about solving problems. And most entrepreneurs, you can see them getting excited about any sort of problem, like whatever it happens to be. So I think kind of the biggest takeaway for me is the market really matters.
Awesome. Liver.
So a lot of people ask, like, what's something that surprised you, that was difficult, that you didn't foresee? Kind of a little bit of a crapshoot, because if you didn't foresee it, it's going to come out of nowhere. What's on the flip side? What's something that you thought was going to be difficult, but in hindsight you're like, oh, I totally shouldn't have shoved resources there? Like something that you thought was going to be really hard, but compared to everything else that came out of you, it's not that challenging.
I don't know. How would you answer that question?
Yeah, I don't know. The thing that, from what
I
we were
thought
talking,
would be
the thing that
hard.
stuck with me actually was the recognition that you and your co-founder had of like how much unreasonably strong growth there was in this place that no one had noticed. The story about the
Yeah, that's fair.
who did the song recognition, like she basically hacked Shazam in her spare time.
Yeah.
Got shut down because she overloaded the servers of the folks at Rhapsody.
Yeah.
That sort of insight, you know.
Yeah, for
It's not
sure.
quite the answer to the question, but that kind of like seeing crazy and just knowing
Yeah.
you can't argue with it, and then just working out how to try and hold on.
It's super, yeah, I would say we never really had to worry about acquisition. We never really had to worry about marketing. Both these things happened because we were early enough that whenever someone wrote about the App Store, they would talk to us, so we'd get press. Because we were one of the most well-known apps, whenever anyone asked their friends, what should you get, they would tell them, so word of mouth was really strong. So we never had to worry about this at all. If I was to launch a mobile app today, I mean, for all my mobile background, I'm not sure I'd be any more successful than, you know, like other folks that are in the market right now, because it's just so fundamentally different.
And competitive, but you're able to catch this wave in the first pass where it's like,
Yeah.
it kept just happening.
But it's super cool. I mean, really, it's what makes me excited about genomics as a space, and there's lots of spaces like this, is it's so nice to be kind of like among the first people that are learning about a new space, because it means that you don't need to execute as perfectly to have an outcome of some sort. And it also means that you're kind of learning, you go into any business with hypotheses and you're testing those hypotheses as you go, and you're going to learn things faster than other people and be able to pivot faster. So I really like those sorts of spaces. I'm personally attracted to them.
So maybe the answer to the question is don't fear the unknown.
Yeah,
It's not as scary as you think.
good question.
You've been through a bunch of different businesses that you've started, as well as McKinsey and Disney and a bunch of others. Do you have any personal practices or team practices that keep you effective or centered, or what do you do yourself? What do you do with your team? Is there anything you've carried with you through your career or learned along the way?
Yeah, I'd say like the biggest thing, characteristic that I see in myself and I'm beginning to recognize maybe is, sure plenty of other people have it, but like is a little bit more unique, is this ability to go, I call it like balcony and dance floor, like be up there and see everything, but then literally the next you walk into that room and walk into the next room and you're really right down in the weeds and working on a very important but quite deep problem. And my co-founder who's great on so many dimensions, like he was not great at that. Like he did that and it was like physically, it was almost like an allergic reaction. Whereas for me, it gave me energy. And so...
Just that context switching.
Yeah, I love it. I think context switching is great. And most people say that's a bad thing, but...
So is there a practice or something you do in order to make sure that you're doing that balcony deck thing?
I would say one thing is I kind of try and... if you're running a business, or even in your job, I think you kind of can organize your week that way a little bit. So, you spend a certain amount of your time talking to other folks in the industry or investors or advisors, and then a certain amount of time with the team. And I'm not someone like, I couldn't just be a CEO that's kind of head up. So I organize myself, I like it, but I think that kind of, therefore I organize myself that way. So, and I think it's it feels kind of important to building a successful company. So if that's not natural, then maybe it's a good thing to learn. Yeah.
Yeah, because the urgent things will grab you whether you like it or not. So
Yeah.
Being able to context switch. Cool. Good question. Yeah.
What was the most important thing that you learned or gained going to Stanford?
Nothing to do with the classes, for sure. And mainly it was the peers. You're around a bunch of other super impressive folks, and in the Silicon Valley, there's a lot of cool stuff going on, and your level of aspiration changes because of the company that you keep, basically. It's a bit like, after I decided not to be a lawyer, if I had been a lawyer in Melbourne right now, for sure I'd still be in Melbourne, I'd still be a lawyer. Then I went to McKinsey and they're like, well, you can do an MBA. And I never thought about doing an MBA. So, and I was around all these smart people, had done MBAs, and it made me excited about maybe doing that. And you come to Stanford and the same, one of the top schools, and you're around all these great people are doing really interesting things. And you start asking yourself the question, can't I do cool stuff as well, So I think that's the main thing. And by the way, the good news is you don't need to pay $150,000 and go to Stanford to do that. I think being in the Silicon Valley, that's why we're here, is I think to raise our individual level of aspiration.
What do you mean by that? What was it?
Sorry?
I didn't quite get the point of why it's easy to go to Stanford.
No, I'm saying you don't need to go to Stanford. I would say like the biggest thing I learned was nothing to do with the classes at Stanford, but more being surrounded by people that have this level of aspiration. And you can get that going to meetups here or hanging out, networking with folks. So I don't think to be honest, so it's great to be able to check out for 2 years, network, think about businesses, get fit, but it certainly wasn't the classes. Yeah.
One thing we covered previously, which I thought was interesting, is you spent 6 months working with the CSIRO on commercialisation, and I think you said something like if you were back in Australia now, that's what you'd be doing because there's just so much opportunity. Tell us just a little bit about that and how maybe pivoting onto that you see the opportunity with the perspective you've had in Silicon Valley and now Europe and back here again, Australian technology and entrepreneurship from your vantage point.
Yeah, I just think there's a lot of really, I mean, in CSIRO and in other places, there are a lot of awesome technical people that are doing great things that is sort of A, going unrecognized, and B, definitely going uncommercialized. And I remember in my time there, my job was just talk to people and see if there was cool stuff we could do. And the folks that I would meet were so grateful that someone was spending the time even just to learn about their agricultural science technology or their forestry science technology or something, but there were really great gems of businesses there. So if I were to go back, I would love to just pluck some things out of CSIRO and then go build some companies back home. But I would say, like, for me, that's a lesson. I mean, the same could be said about engineers in your company, right? I mean, those guys oftentimes are the key to success, and I think we think about them too often as just being sort of executors of someone else's strategy. Yeah.
Cool. I think we've got time for one more. We still have some picture as well when we're done, and plenty of drinks up the back. All right, maybe two more. Only two. Back corner and then down here. Go ahead.
One of the things that I was curious about your opinion on something. I mean, we hear stories a lot of people working insane hours, 80-hour weeks, 100-hour weeks, weekends, but you also hear the other side of the story, which is extreme cases of burnout. So I was just wondering, given your experience as a serial entrepreneur, what have you learned in terms of how do you strike that balance between working extremely hard and hitting deadlines and keeping people motivated without killing teams? It's doable.
It's super hard. I mean, for me personally, when I'm really focused on something, I mean, it's hard not to be thinking about it 24 hours of the day. And so if all you're doing is thinking about it and wanting to work on it, then it's hard not to have the same expectations of the team, to be honest. I would say the stress gets easier. Like, being stressed about things definitely gets easier with experience. Because again, like, you recognize these ups and downs. You're like, okay, it's kind of a bad day, but I'm not going to get stressed about it because I've seen that sort of thing before. I have pattern recognition. But I mean, I don't have a good answer. I think it depends. The ideal thing is to find folks to work on a company that are similarly motivated, excited, have equity, want to work hard, and somehow not get burned out along the way. I have no idea. Yeah.
All right, last question.
I find there's this commonly recurring theme when, in the Valley, I guess, and about entrepreneurs, where it's there's this story about, it was really hard, but I persevered, and it's because of my perseverance I achieved this great success. And that's one storyline. And then there's this other storyline, which is, I was doing this thing and it really wasn't working, so I pivoted. And when we pivoted, we figured out that was the thing. You realize that those two storylines are actually completely opposed to each other.
Except that they kept moving.
I guess I'm interested, I guess in your experience, did you ever feel you should have pivoted, or you should have quit earlier, or you should have what's the sort of a framework to think about when you're onto the right thing or the wrong?
Well, and to make it even harder, if you talk to your board or your advisors, oftentimes when you persevere, they're already telling you, they told you should have pivoted, or when you're pivoting, they should tell you to persevere. So the advice you get is super inconsistent as well. And they're smart people, which means I don't think, the outcome is there's a bit of a crapshoot. The outcome is a bit independent of the choice that you make. There are people that pivot that succeed, and there are people that pivot that fail. People that persevere that succeed, and people that persevere that fail. I don't think there's a formula for sure.
Awesome. Well, please join me in thanking Andrew for his time and amazing story and coming along to this event tonight. Thank you very much.
Thanks.